to Backendless 5 release overview. My name is Mark Pillar. I'm the founder of the company, and I'll be presenting Backendless 5 to you today. Backendless 5 is a major release. It took us about a year to get it ready, a little bit less than a year, ever since we released Backendless 4. And the focus of the Backendless 5 release was real-time capabilities, specifically real-time capabilities for the Backendless database and Backendless messaging. Before I dive directly into Backendless 5, I'd like to go over the Backendless 5 roadmap, which is really a roadmap for any releases that will be taking place between Backendless 5 and Backendless 6. Many of the features that you see here in the list are technically ready. You know, we're going through either some final stages in testing or documentation, really just productizing these features and making sure that they can be ready for consumption. So this is really kind of 5.x roadmap. Most of these are rather self-explanatory, and for the ones that went into Backendless 5.0, I'll be demonstrating them to you so you can see how they work. The first three really just are related to real-time directly. Backendless database now can emit real-time events, and we'll be talking about it in detail. Messaging is also, we added support for real-time to get rid of polling previously in Backendless messaging, which is really a publish, subscribe implementation. It was based on polling. Subscribers previously had to periodically send a request to the backend to grab any pending messages. That is no longer the case now. Backend pushes those messages proactively to all the subscribers. Real-time logging will give you an ability to see logs in Backendless console in real time without any page refreshes. You'll be able to do filtering and see any kind of relevant information that you might need to have while you're debugging a problem or seeing any kind of activity from your users. Remote shared objects is really an interesting feature. If any of you had any experience back in the Flash Flex days, you might know what remote shared objects are, and most of the people haven't had that experience. What this really means, I'm going to give you a quick preview of remote shared objects. It's a logical object or rather physical object that sits on the server side and has a logical name. So any client can connect to that object that sits on the server. And the cool thing about this object is anytime any of the properties of that object change, then all other clients that are connected to that shared object immediately get a notification that a property has changed. And the object is persisted, so if all clients get disconnected, the object still stays there on the server, and then when you reconnect to it later, you can still see and get all the properties. And the actual object is really just a map, a sort of a dictionary with key value pairs. Very, very cool feature, and that's in our roadmap. Active record, really just a pattern for the objects that are stored in the database, where whenever changes occur in that object, you get notified and receive really not a copy, but the actual object with the modifications that took place. Offline is fairly self-explanatory. Everyone knows what it is, and we're working on it, so we can finally claim that we have support for offline mode in our SDKs. Mobile landing pages is really a cool feature that will give you sort of a CMS, content management system, for your application, that you will be able to fill up the data about your app, and Backendless will generate, based on the template, a really cool looking web page that you can release to the rest of the world to announce your app or have a web presence for your mobile app with all the traditional sections such as features, benefits, team, contact us, and so on. And you can decide what section is going to go in there. And there's a variety of different templates differentiated for the look and feel that you can choose from. So that's also in the roadmap. Push notifications, we have completely redesigned how one works with push notifications in Backendless. So the push notifications section of the Backendless console as it exists today is going to be gone for a good reason, because what will replace it is going to be so far and beyond in its capabilities that it's just going to be absolutely fantastic. So that one is actually pretty high up on the roadmap and will appear soon. Zapier integration will give you an ability to create those workflows through Zapier.com. If you're not familiar with Zapier, it's sort of a marketplace of services where different services can be, where all the services are split into triggers and action. So it's sort of if this, then that type of thing, where you can configure a trigger, and then you can select an action. So for example, a trigger could be an object is stored in Backendless database, and the actual action could be sending a Slack message, or sending an email, or sending an SMS, or updating a Google spreadsheet. You name it. There is about 1,000 of different services in Zapier, and we'll be providing integration with it where you can start integrating Backendless both on the action side and on the trigger side with all those 1,000 different services. Phone-based authentication is pretty self-explanatory. It gives you an ability to log into an app just with the phone number. So sort of passwordless login where all you need to have is the phone number. That one is pretty much ready, and we will be releasing it fairly soon. Backendless Pro, which is the standalone version of Backendless, is being redesigned architecturally, really from ground up. We are taking the Docker-based approach where individual components of Backendless are going to be running in separate Docker images. So the database is going to be separate Docker. The core app server of Backendless is going to be separate. All the code runners, task managers, and so on, everything is going to be in a Docker image. And you can control the replication, scalability, all of it using Docker facilities. A very, very cool set of changes that we're in the process of. And finally, support for external databases. That will be a Backendless Pro only feature that will give you an ability to connect Backendless to an external database such as MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, Postgre, and then work with Backendless using Backendless Data API to operate on the data in an external database. Cool thing that we're doing there is as long as you're using Backendless Data API, your external database will turn into real time instantly. So you don't need to do anything, but your MySQL could actually become a real time database by the virtue of this integration. So that's kind of the Backendless 5 roadmap, fairly rich roadmap just for one sort of slice of the releases with 5.x. We're not even touching 6.0 because that will be something that's that I really cannot share any information about yet. But anyway, so these releases kind of land on a time scale, as you can see, with over the next 5-6 months. Most of it is going to be done and released by in our October. Some features may be moved around between different releases, so this is kind of a preliminary preview of how things look at this point. But they may get pushed around in different manner. So that's where we are as far as the actual roadmap. Now, let's go back to the current release, which is 5.0.0, and let's talk about what is included in there. The real-time database and messaging, we'll be discussing that in greater detail. In fact, for all of these features that went into 5.0, I'll be doing a demo so you can see exactly how these things work. There are a lot of bug fixes, of course, that I'm not really worth mentioning. If you want to see the details, it's all in the release history that you can access through Backendless console just by clicking on Backendless logo, or actually Backendless the version number in the console. But these are really the major features that differentiate 5.0 from the previous release. Let's as far as the slides, that's all I have. So let's switch to the product and just start exploring real-time database messaging and the other features as well. So right here, I do have a Backendless console. This is running in production. You would, if you have an account in Backendless, yours would look exactly the same. So let me show you Backendless real-time database first of all. Nothing really has changed in the UI. So here, whenever you see your tables, the only difference is there's going to be this real-time checkbox where if it is selected, your data in the database becomes real-time, automatic. Okay, and what that means is this. So first of all, I will generate an application that will have the real-time capabilities, and that generation will be done through the project templates. So here, if I go into project templates, whether you select Android, iOS, or JavaScript, all of those templates are real-time enabled. I'm going to go with JavaScript because starting with Android and iOS with emulator, it's going to take some time, so I just don't want to spend any extra time on waiting for the emulator to come up. So I'll just use JavaScript. The user experience, the developer experience will be exactly the same if you were to do it with Android and iOS. So now I have the zip file. I'm going to extract it, and which opened up in a separate window. You cannot see it, but what I'm going to do is I will open that generated project with my IntelliJ IDEA, or WebStorm, if you will. And as soon as this window comes up, there you go. This is the generated project. Since this is JavaScript, one thing that you will need to do is to bring all the libraries, and that is done through npm-i or npm install. That brings all the Backendless libraries, really just the Backendless library, into the scope of this project, and now it is ready to go. So let me run it first of all, and then we'll take a look at the code just to see how it works. So I'm going to open it in Safari, and in here, it just runs and stores an object in the Backendless database. So right here, there is going to be a test table created, and that test table contains an object that was created by this specific application. Okay, the property foo is what the UI of this app allows you to change. So right here, if I were to type in, right now the value is hello world. If I were to type in a new value, and let's just say real time is cool, and click update, notice that the console got updated automatically. And that is done because of real time. Okay, it is bidirectional. So if I were to change this object using Backendless API in my application, console automatically reflects the change. If I were to do the same thing in console, so let me switch it so you can see both the actual app and console, and type in here, changing value in console. As soon as I press enter, notice that the application got the updated value automatically. In fact, I think it was faster in displaying it in the app than updating it here in the console. If I were to run multiple instances of these, meaning like if I were to open another Safari window and have, this one actually created a separate object, so they're not really looking at the same one. So what I wanted to show you is kind of showing you multiple browsers updating for the same object, but right now by default, every time this runs, it creates a separate object. So sorry about that. I will not be able to demonstrate multiple browsers just because of how the code here is written. But anyway, as you can see, it is bidirectional. So let's take a look at the actual code to see what it really takes to turn it into real time. And all of that code is going to be right here in app.js. And you will see a couple of things. First of all, when object is created, right here, this is the code for creating an object. Nothing has changed here. You'll be creating objects and updating objects in Backendless exactly the same way. What is different now is that you can add listeners to be notified when certain things change in the Backendless database. So right here, there's a call to subscribe on the object changes, which is this function. So the actual Backendless API is right here. And notice that we have this test table store, which is the result of backendless.data.off right here. So this is, we get a pointer to our test table. Okay. Now there is a new function called RT, which stands for real time. And then we're adding add update listener. Okay. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see the text of it better. Actually, I cannot. There you go. So notice that the argument for the add update listener is really just a where clause. If you're familiar with Backendless, you know our database operates on what we call where clause, which is part of an SQL statement that goes into the where section. So in here, what we're saying is that anytime object with that specific ID changes in the database, invoke this particular function. Okay, so and the rest is going to be completely automatic. Backendless real-time database tracks when object with this ID changes in the database, and when it does, then Backendless will automatically invoke object update object value function right here. Okay, it will work exactly the same way for Android and for iOS. Whether in iOS it could be Objective-C or Swift. And likewise, you can add listeners for when objects are created and objects are deleted. And either you can do it for the entire table or for a particular where clause. And in that where clause, it doesn't have to be just the object ID. You can reference really any property of the object. So if you want to monitor changes for users table where the users are from particular zip code. And if you have the zip code property, you can say zip code equals and then specific value. Or it could be a complex query. All the formats for these queries are in our documentation, which was updated for real time. Notice that when the callback function is invoked, update object value, it gets the argument is an object. So this object is the actual object that was modified in the database. And here, notice that we just access the foo property and display it in the UI. So that's how it works. It's very, very simple from the programming model. You really just add listeners to different tables, and then they just trigger whenever changes take place. So as far as these listeners, it's important for you to monitor the number of those listeners in your application, for the reason that depending on the pricing plan that you're on, the number of these listeners per application will vary. So like with the free plan, I believe you can add up to 5 listeners, and then that number increases from one plan to another. And if you are in Backendless Pro, it really is unlimited. There is really no limit. But within Backendless Cloud, you need to make sure that the number of these listeners is controlled. So as soon as you are done listening for a particular update, delete that listener, and using the API, you'll see them all in the documentation. So that's the API, and once again, it will be identical with Android and iOS. Okay. Creating new objects, deleting objects works exactly the same way as updating objects when it comes to real-time database. There is also a hook in real-time database with Backendless business logic. So if you want to centralize the processing of your data in cloud code, like whenever new clients connect, you may want to do certain things. You can do it in business logic, in Java, in JavaScript, or in Codeless, okay? And the way you can do this is by going to business logic, and then if you go to event handlers and create a new event handler, In the category, you will need to select real-time events. And then here's a list of all different events that you can create an event listener for. Now, the event listener in Cloud Code. Specifically, when it comes to real-time database, the event listeners that apply are client connected, client disconnected, and client user presence changed. All other event listeners are related to messaging, which we will be talking about next. So here, if you were to create an event listener for cloud client connected, anytime new app comes, a new instance of your app is started, and then client connects to real-time database, this particular callback will be invoked and your cloud code can do some execution. So on the client connected, there is timing on before and after. So if you select before client connected, then your cloud code can actually determine whether that client can stay and have the connection or not. So you can actually reject client connections based on some heuristics that would make sense inside of your application. If it is after, then the connection is already established, and whatever the logic may apply here, you would decide. Okay, client user presence changed is invoked whenever you establish a listener, when you create a listener for real-time database, and then login, basic Backendless login takes place. So this user logs in, and you may need to know in your database that user is logged in. So you may need to execute some functions, which is particularly important, maybe more important in messaging apps, whenever you have to have a presence and the context of who that user is. But anyway, so that one is also available to you. I will not be generating any cloud code here. You can learn about it in documentation, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask away using the chat section of Zoom. So that's the cloud code. And with real-time database, I think that's all I wanted to show you today. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask. But for now, I'm going to switch to real-time messaging. So real-time messaging, as I mentioned earlier, really is an improvement over our implementation of publish-subscribe messaging. If you're not familiar with publish-subscribe, the concept is pretty straightforward. In Backendless, we have the concept of channels. Think of these channels as sort of the individual pipes, right? So publisher or publishers can send messages into a channel, into that pipe, and Backendless automatically knows who the subscribers, who the listeners are on the other end of that pipe, and then delivers published messages to those subscribers. So that's really the concept of publish subscribe. Previously, and specifically in Backendless version 4, subscribers would be receiving published messages by polling the server, meaning the subscriber would have to send a request every so often to get any published messages. And more frequently you would send the messages, the quicker you would get them for something closer to real-time kind of simulation. But that was very inefficient for the reason that frequent requests sent from a mobile app drain the battery, plus it just racks up the number of API calls that your application makes. And since API calls per minute in version 4 was something that a lot of people really kind of cherished, and they just didn't want to waste their API calls, which is quite understandable. That is also kind of undesirable. So now with Backendless 5 and real-time messaging, that polling is gone. Unless you're building a REST application, there's really no support for real-time with REST, because REST is based on request to response paradigm. But with real-time messaging, things are very different, because now subscribers establish a dedicated connection with our cluster of real-time servers. And then whenever there is a message for a channel, Backendless automatically delivers that message to the subscribers. So let me demonstrate how that would actually work using the most, I think the simplest way to demonstrate, which is a chat application. So now as far as chat, we have updated all our code generators, that is for JavaScript, for Android, for iOS, there is this real-time chat. And we made an extra effort to make sure that all the chats that are generated by Backendless are integrated with each other out of the box. Meaning that if you were to run a chat application generated by JavaScript and then generate an iOS chat and run a chat client in iOS and a chat client in the browser using JavaScript, then it will work out of the box. You'll be able to exchange messages with each other. Let me demonstrate it just with the JavaScript for the simplicity's sake. So here, I generated an application. Now I have a zip file on my computer that I could open in my IDE. But since this is JavaScript and it can just be loaded from a web server, for all the code generators, including the one for chat, we also put the generated project back into Backendless. So check this out. If I go to Files, here's the generated zip file. And if I were to unzip it, right here, so it's now being unzipped, and right here, this is the unzipped directory from what was generated. If I go into here, then this is the chat client. Let me copy the URL and just open it in a browser. Okay, this is something that I was testing earlier, so let me just start again and type in that my name is going to be Mark. Actually, it just started with a new one. I'll say it's Mark Pillar. I think it just picks up previous messages. But anyway, so let me take the URL and open this in a browser. And in here, all right, so this user is logged in as Joe. And to put them side by side, both instances of the browser are both publishers and subscribers. So in here, if I were to say hello and send it as a message, see that message is delivered to all the clients because everyone is a subscriber. And then in here, if I were to respond, hi there, and you see that hi there is being replicated everywhere. And this is really instantaneous. If you were to open hundreds of these, then all of them would be getting that message almost instantly, or instantly, depending how many you have. We've tested with thousands, and it worked really, really well. As far as publish subscribe, whenever you're subscribing, there are different ways you could subscribe. You could subscribe to receive all messages published into the channel, or you could subscribe with what we call filtered subscription, where you can specify that you are interested only specific subset of messages, and that subset is controlled through selectors. So whenever a message is published, it really is an object, and then that object may have additional metadata attached to it, headers, right? So whenever you subscribe, you could use the same where clause that would reference the headers, and in there you say that I want to have messages where the value of the header starts with or equals to or whatever, with specific values, and then Backendless will deliver those messages to you only that match that specific where clause. So how is it implemented, if you were to ask? Let's take a look at the JavaScript implementation. So in here, we'll just use the built-in editor and see whether that works for us or not. Let's take a look at both publishing and subscribing side of this. So as far as publishing, let's take a look where this one is. Right here. So if we have a message, so in other words, you typed in something and pressed enter. So if there's a message, then we take the channel, and there's a reference to this channel object that was obtained somewhere early on, I believe. Let's take a look where it is. So here it is. We subscribe to the messages channel, okay, right here on line 32. And then the messages channel is called chat right here. So if we were to switch to console to the chat channel, we would see all those messages. Now we'll show you that to you in a second. But anyway, once we have the channel object, whenever we need to send a message, what we do is we say channel.publish, okay? And there is some additional decoration going on just to put the username into the color, but then the actual message just follows on, okay? So this is just a single line, and that hasn't changed. We had this all along. So publishing works exactly the same way as it did before in version 4. What is different now is that you can subscribe to receive messages, and the subscription is going to be somewhere here. Let me take a look. So we have the channel, and I'm just looking through the call to get the, there you go. So channel, add message listener. Okay. So right here, just simply by calling add message listener and specifying the callback on message, that creates the real-time subscription. So anytime a message shows up on this channel, then on message will be automatically invoked right here in our client application. So that is completely automatic. So all the logic for establishing the connection or re-establishing the connection if something fails, all of it is sitting inside of our Backendless SDK for JavaScript. And likewise, it would be in Backendless SDK for Android and iOS. And the simplicity is phenomenal because really just one line of code turns it into a real-time messaging application. Using exactly the same add message listener right here, you could create filtered listeners and just see the documentation for details. In there, you would just specify really just a condition that would control what messages would need to be delivered to your client application. And that's it. So single JS file for JavaScript or really just two libraries on Android and iOS take care of this automatically for you. Okay. Let's see. So that's messaging. One other thing that I wanted to show you is in here. So we have the chat channel. If I were to publish a message, just say test message. Okay. Notice that the console automatically displays the published message right here. Okay, with this annotation for the color. And likewise, I could just take that message and I would say message from console. And if I were to publish this message, then notice that this message from console that was sent from console now appears on the client side. So it is also bidirectional. Simply by publishing a message into a channel from console, goes through the real-time processing and is handled exactly the same way. As I mentioned, integration with Cloud Code is available for real-time database. It is also available for real-time messaging. And when it comes to real-time messaging, let's take a look at the event handlers available to you. They are going to be channel joined, channel left, channel messages, subscriber added, and subscriber removed. Okay, so these are the callbacks that take place. You see the documentation for details of what individual event listeners mean and what they do, but highly encourage you to start using them, especially if you want to centralize, to put some processing, some logic into centralized place rather than keeping it on individual clients. So the Cloud Code integration is very, very straightforward, and it works for Java, JavaScript, and Codeless. You can add these event listeners for all of them. Okay, so that's real-time messaging. Once again, if you have any questions, please use the chat section. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Now, the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is a new feature in Backendless, is support for management of Backendless cache and Backendless counters. I think a lot of people are not familiar with these concepts because there was really no presence, no kind of visualization for counters and cache in Backendless, but they are very, very powerful concepts. If you're not familiar with cache or Backendless cache and counters, I'm going to spend just a few minutes to describe what they are, and then I will demonstrate how management of these features works. So Backendless cache is a server-side cache that is based on key value storage. So you could have a key, which is a string, and you could have an object mapped to that key, and that object can be anything. It could be a primitive value, such as an integer, string, date. It could be a complex type, really an object or an array of objects, array of primitive values. You name it, you can store anything in Backendless cache. And the APIs that we provide give you an ability to put something into cache, to retrieve it from cache, to delete it from the cache, to prolong the life of that object in cache, because notice that every cache entry has the expire at property, which is the time when Backendless will remove it from cache automatically. So here, with this new addition in Backendless 5, we provided a way to, first of all, visualize everything that is available in cache so you can see and inspect your cache entries. Once they show up here, you'll be able to delete them, or you can create new values in cache just by using the management interface, okay? So here, let's just say my property is going to be name, and the value is going to be Joe, right? So now I have a cache entry where name is Joe. Or I could have put here JSON, which is a response from some find query, just so it is cached and I don't hit the database every time. And access to cache, since this is an in-memory cache with some persistence to the database, is significantly faster than access to the database. Although our database is pretty darn fast, here you would actually be saving some time to make it even faster. So that's cache, very, very basic concept. Counters is, one thing that I wanted to mention with cache, it is cross-platform. So if I were to store something in cache from my Java cloud code or from my Android application, and let's say it is an array of complex types, array of Java objects, and that goes into cache. Backendless automatically will transform that value from cache to the appropriate format depending on what the client is. So let's say I stored that array of objects in cache from Android, but then I have a JavaScript client looking up that value. Backendless will automatically transform all those Java objects into JavaScript objects that would be delivered to the JavaScript client, and vice versa, from JavaScript to iOS, from iOS to Android, from Android everywhere else. It's anything to anything transformation that we automatically take care of for you. So you don't have to spend any time writing code to kind of adapt values from one system or from some neutral format into specific representation in your client application. So that's a very important, very cool feature. Now, counters. So counters is an even simpler concept. Every counter has a name, which is just a logical name, and has a value, and the value is always a number. Okay. Now, these counters are atomic, meaning that if you have an application that has a very high number of concurrent clients, hundreds, thousands, you name it, so a lot of traffic, and then every one of those clients, modifies a value of a counter. As Backendless receives multiple concurrent calls, it actually modifies the counter value atomically, meaning that no two calls will actually be stepping on each other. So there is this kind of atomic wrap on the modification of any individual value. Counters could be important for anything. Whenever you build games, you may want to use counters. Whenever you want to have a quick way of calculating how many orders you have processed without hitting the database, you could do that here too. So there is a variety of different use cases, and we provide the APIs to create counters, to increment them by a certain value, to decrement, to reset to 0, to increment if it is of a certain value. So all those APIs are available in the SDK. There is a REST API for all of them. And what we've never had is we never had this management facility that is available here. So now, to demonstrate how these guys work, let's create some cache and some counters using code. And I think the most visual way to do this would be by using Codeless. So here I'm going to create a timer that will be done in Codeless, and cache modifier, right? Let's call that timer cache modifier. And let's say that this guy will run every 5 seconds. Okay, so let's create this cache modifier. And in here we have the caching API, and we will put data into cache, and let's call it from Codeless timer. Okay, and then the data is going to be, I don't know if we have current time. That would be interesting. Date from timestamp, current time. There you go. So date now. That's going to be our date. So every 5 seconds, this timer will wake up and we will put current date time into this specific key name. That's what it's going to do. So let's just deploy, and that timer will start running right away. And if we go back to data and take a look at cache, then here, it is not here. Let's see, maybe there is a problem. Hold on, there you go. So it just took some time to run. So there you go, from codeless timer, and this is the value. So every 5 seconds, this value will be updating. And then any other application, any other client using this particular backend can use the API to retrieve. One thing to note is these two screens, Backendless cache and Backendless counters, they're not enabled for real time yet. That is something that we are planning on doing and we'll be taking care of fairly soon. But as of right now, you really need to use the refresh button to get this. So that's definitely on our roadmap to change this. So as you can see that this value is now 1741.31. Refresh it, and it's now a different value. Likewise, let's also create a counter using codeless, and also we'll create another timer, and select codeless, and then we'll call it counter timer. Similarly, this guy will run every 5 seconds, and we will use the counter API to increment the value of this counter. Codeless counter, that's going to be the counter name. We'll increment it by, I don't know, let's pick 25. Okay, deploy it. And now that timer is running, so let's go back to data, select counters, and there you go, codeless counter. So now every 5 seconds, this value will be incremented by 25. That's really the demonstration of the cache and counters. And I think you will find it very, very useful in your applications, although it has been available for a while, but I think the lack of this management facility made it kind of harder to use. Let's see. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, and we have about 15 minutes left, is the support for API documentation generation. An extremely, extremely powerful feature. We sort of started with this by adding integration with Postman, but I think what we did now really just makes it way, way, way more useful. And let me demonstrate how this works. So I'm going to pick a table. Let's call it the person table. And if I switch to REST console, there is a new link here. Not very noticeable, but it sort of kind of belongs in the whole REST thing, although there might probably be a better place for it, but perhaps somewhere here we'll think about it. But anyway, the way this works is if you click on Generate API Docs, you get 8 different formats of the API documentation that can be generated for the selected table. So here, the selected table is person, and let me generate Swagger 2.0 Open API. And then the version of that API, because the table schema may be changing, so you may want to change the actual version. I'm going to generate, and Backendless automatically generates the API for the selected table, stores it in the file. You can either download this file, and there you go, you get your JSON, or you can copy the URL. So what can you do with this copied URL? Well, there are a number of things. If you use API management solution, you can import that documentation in there and start managing your APIs in Apigee or whatever. Here, I'm going to open swagger.io, and there is a thing called Swagger Inspector. And in Swagger Inspector, I can just paste the URL of the JSON that was generated from my person table, and then it automatically inspects this, and now I have all the Backendless APIs with documentation generated for it right in Swagger. So for example, this one retrieves all the data from the person table. So here I can remove, let's say I'm going to set the page size to 100, and I'm going to remove all the other parameters for the demo purposes. Okay, and if I click send, okay, now I get the response from Backendless in Swagger. And then here, notice that it's all the APIs for Backendless. Plus, you can integrate it with login and user registration, which we thought would be useful to include it in here. And then likewise, for any other API management tool, you can start importing your Backendless APIs into this. Plus, uh, uh, where it's also could be very, very useful is with all the no code, low code utilities and then the applications that come up that allow you to create mobile and web apps without writing any code. The backend integration is done through this kind of integration. Okay. So here, being able to generate these APIs for specific tables that you work with, it becomes extremely useful feature. So it is available now for data. For messaging, if you were to select a particular channel, right here, there's an icon, which I believe is probably better placed than the other approach. You can also generate these APIs for your messaging channel. And there is also integration for generating these APIs for files. So here, if you were to select a particular directory, let's say web, you can click Generate API Docs and generate all the APIs for that specific directory. So you will have all the APIs available in Backendless for that particular directory represented through Open API or YAML or RAML or WADL, you name it. So all of these formats are supported. So that's the API generation. We're planning on and working on a couple of articles that will demonstrate how to use this API generation. One of them is actually going to be coming up fairly soon, and you'll be able to see it in action. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention that became available shortly after we announced 5.0 is our Backendless SDK for iOS has been modified where it's no longer just iOS. Exactly the same library that we have also works for Watch OS and TV OS. So you can start building apps for Apple TV and for Apple Watch with all the capabilities that exist in Backendless. That's also done. And finally, we also released a new product in our marketplace that provides access to Amazon Alexa. So there is a new SDK called SDK for Amazon Alexa. And then once you install it, then you get all the functions that you can start using to build apps for to create custom Alexa skills. So that was released just yesterday. There's going to be a separate webinar dedicated to building Alexa skills, but I wanted to mention it anyway. So that's all I had prepared for you today. Now let's open floor for any questions, really anything either related to what I demonstrated to you today or in general, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. All right, guys, we're almost out of time. Thanks, everyone who joined us today. If you can think of any other questions, you are welcome to please join our Slack channel. It is at backendless.slack.com, or to get an invite, it's slack.backendless.com. Or send it to our support forum, which is support.backendless.com. Subscribe to our blog. It is updated now almost daily with new articles and different topics. And there will be more webinars, of course. If you have any suggestions on what you would like to hear and or discussed in our future webinars, please let us know. The email to contact us is info@backendless.com. My personal email is mark@backendless.com. And once again, thanks everyone. And as always, happy coding.